So here I am at the bus station, probably about 7, maybe 8:15. The bus for Sevilla is pulling out. I'm waiting for a bus, believe it or not, at 9:30. But what do you do? We're en route now from Rondo to Arco de Frontera in the west, going backwards a bit. Here are the whitewashed homes. Reservoir over there that extends all the way back here and then far to the left where we came in on it. Just come up over that mountain and we're over on the other side now. It's interesting to see these homes all in there, some being built. Look like quite nice homes. The land is covered with olive trees everywhere. See beautiful homes, a pool. Much cooler up here than elsewhere. I just wonder how they financially justify being up to small communities like this one, and then literally turn around, go back down to the next one. It's a fun milk run, because you get to see a lot more than you normally would if he doesn't back this thing off over the edge. The village of Villa Martin. Whitewashed to reflect the summer sun's heat. All throughout this part of Spain I've seen little patches of what look like cotton. Just before Arco, a little tour shuttle bus from the bus depot here in Arco. Saw this old building, thought I'd get a shot at it. Imagine how pretty this would look in Jackson if it were restored. Opposite this pretty entrance. Don't know what this is, but it's pretty. Oh, hospitality. San Juan de Dios. So some kind of hospital, something akin to that. Hills, get up inside. Okay, we're now in the Plaza del Cabildo. Over here is the Parador, a former palace of the governor. Flies 3 flags, the Andalusian flag, the flag for Spain, and the flag for the European Union. To the left, across the square, is the City Hall, backdropped by the old Moorish castle, which, believe it or not, is privately owned. Yeah, I'll just pan around from this viewpoint up on top so we have a sense of... We've come from that direction, and we'll go back there shortly. And here I'll pan down so we'll get a view of what's below us. The erosion here, just like in Southern California, this Parador building lost part of its end when it eroded and fell off in the 1990s. The viewpoint is the departure point, suicide departure point for men. Apparently women jump off the other side, whether he means the other side from where I'm standing or literally the other side of this hill. Notice here how this wall has dropped off through erosion. This church of Santa Maria in the 13th century, when the Christians took over from the Muslims, they razed the Muslim mosque and built this church over it. So much curious about this church aesthetically is when you look at it, it does look like the bell tower is chopped off, and that is a fact. In the 1755 earthquake that leveled Lisbon, it was sufficient to knock this off. That must have been one hell of an earthquake. They built this much of it back, but apparently they ran out of money. Apparently the man who rings the bells lives on the top floor, whichever the top floor is, in a room strewn with the ropes from the bells. Rick's quite enchanted with the beauty of this carved choir. What I notice about it is actually what seems to be not only a difference in style, it's not that heavy, deep carved, robust, Baroque. Rather, it reminds me of something out of the Victorian era, particularly these panels in the back, which have the lighter wood. Again, these don't appear to have that profound carving that those other places have. What I think is clever about these seats is that you can sit halfway down with the seat up on that little bum rest, if you will. I think the gold or brass finials here are interesting. The organ is from 1789, and again it has that lighter colored wood, which I find somewhat refreshing given the heavy darkness of most of the other churches and cathedrals we've been in. Here's a classic example of that device for holding the huge books. This could hold 4 of them. It was capable of being spun. So, for example, you could put 4 books on, 2 the same on each different side, and then spin it 90 degrees so the choir could see a second song immediately. There appears to be no transept in here, so I'm just shooting from the back, or the should be the west end, to the top, from over the choir. Now I've turned around and I'll do a pan down so that we can see this altar. Again, not particularly different than others I've seen. That nice stone carving look like, whatever it is up there, is, I think, an interesting capstone on this particular altar piece. Probably from the light that's put on it, this seems brighter and more easily accessible, certainly by camera. Here, relatively speaking, a modest pulpit, certainly this lower part, almost light and airy in design. Kind of thing you might put in your house if you had this kind of decor as a stairway to the next floor. Apparently the top portion portrays God with a globe. Interesting that he's restricted his perspective to a globe, but then he is wearing a beard. Did you know that? And then apparently Jesus' stories panels are to the right, while Mary's are to the left. I don't know about that. This is apparently an original wall painting taken from another church and then restored here in 1972. How they do that, I don't quite know. They have to remove the entire wall surface, I would think. Rick points out that this also hides a mosque niche. And Rick points out that this is Gothic, although that ceiling doesn't have much of a design off of, at least looks-wise, a barrel vault, but it certainly is. You can see that those actually peak up between the pillars, like right up there. Yet this must, in his mind, define Baroque. I lose track of it. Baroque does seem to me to be this over-the-top kind of thing. This pretty, in a small sense, because of the white offsetting the all too great a use of gold color. And in this chapel that I've looked at, is incorruptible body of incorruptible Saint Felix, 3rd century martyr. Again, very fascinating when you realize the recent, I think it was Scientific American or Smithsonian article or archaeology article on the penchant for resurrecting bodies and then pawning them off as actual relics. This may be exactly that. Now, as Rick points out, there's a chink in the armor of this statement about his incorruptibility because we're looking at his knee. And you can see his knee bone, the flesh is gone, all that remains is a silver mesh. And Rick points out that Rome sent his body here in 1764. This is then apparently, to put it in his words, a gnarly Easter candle from 1764. This, of course, is way over the top Baroque. Notice the phenomenal emphasis on just displaying gold, the restrained use of any actual figures and storyline, apparently. Looks like one's missing too, immediately to our right, whoever that central figure at the top is. This, of course, being the Virgin Mary. Here, interestingly enough, a very quick look down a very narrow aisle, the right aisle. Here to the left side is a 3rd century Roman votive altar with a carving of the palm tree of life directly in front of us. We can see that. While the Romans did not have a church or a village up this high, they did have a temple down below. But this was found in an earlier Muslim mosque, rather a Moorish mosque, which stood here before this church was built. Now we're facing the west entry, which would have been the main entrance to the church. It's closed now, apparently, for restoration, although I didn't see anything taking place. This is a definition by Rick of this plateresque architecture. In other words, where everything is overlaid in detail with some kind of, cement carving or whatever, but it looks like it is of silver design, like something you'd find on a silver goblet or chalice. And that's where it gets its name from. This is a 15th century magic circle with 12 red and 12 white stones. The white ones have various constellations marked, but they don't fit any of today's charts. I guess that's what these these gray dots are. So it's interesting that at that time the constellations would have looked that different. There are apps that would allow us to go back and perhaps discover which these were at the time, if we were that knowledgeable about stars. When you were going to baptize a child, you stopped here and gave it a good Christian exorcism, to use Rick's words. The exorcist would stand inside the circle and do his thing. On the other side from where we entered, underneath these buttresses along this alleyway, Rick wants us to be sure to notice the scratches of innumerable car and truck mirrors as they went through this narrow place. These were installed in 1699, and ironically, not only did they buttress up the building, but they saved it in 1755 for the big one. And notice the barred windows which protected the nuns. This is interesting window design. On the interior you have the shutters. Then you have the actual glass doors that open up. You have some swinging screen doors, which probably allowed you then to have full air movement without letting critters get in. Notice that the bottom is without grills, so that would have stopped. And then you have the permanently installed bars to protect the house. An interesting and intimate little alleyway just before we swing to the right to go to the market. It's an interesting entryway, presumably to a church, but it doesn't look like a church, particularly with the restaurant right outside, but I'll go inside and see. But before I do, I notice these two ports up here with the heavily pretty iron barrier. Could this have been also a convent? You've done it again, Scott. Without looking at any instructions, he divines what this place is. There were a lot of ladies tucked away for eternity in these places. Another example of the convent's window, sales window. That device, when you would ring a bell or knock on it, they would put the food in it and then rotate it. You could get the food and you put your money in. It looks like the remains of a church. Sadly, this part of it's not operating. I believe I've covered all that Rick feels is important, but I thought I'd pursue at least these older buildings I could see in the distance. This is a house for pensioners and so forth, but notice the pretty Gothic columns and arches inside here. But a pretty comfortable place for them to spend the rest of their days, I suppose. And rather than living here, it may just be a place to come and hang out. Here another church. Not necessarily a surprise, but a big one, more dramatic looking. You wonder if its tower survived. I think one of the identifying characteristics of Plateresque is this idea that, as this illustrates right here, it looks like something added to an existing surface, which this of course is. Now this church I've come into has an interesting organ. Not only is it robust looking, but it actually sits on its own designed platform, which then has a very interesting alcove of Jesus on the crucifixion. This is great. We see how the choir book holder was used. Certainly a Gothic church from its arches. An altar that gives the sense of fine streams of gold dripping down in a choreographed manner of curtains over each of those panels. And then these side sculptures. Interesting that they're put on those corners. Here, curiously, to the left of the other end of the church, in other words, not the altar side, is this substantial chapel, would you call it? It would be a church in any other context. A pretty dome, but unfortunately not illuminated by its designer, so you can't appreciate its beauty. Here, a modest incense holder on its long cord. I don't see how it could be swung, but perhaps it didn't have to be. It's kind of ornate silver casket holding a statue of a body of crucified Christ seems to me not only contradictory, oxymoronic, but a little bit bizarre. And here, contrary to what the Christians would say, is the idol of Mary. The two very beautiful glass something or others right there. I'd say chandeliers, but they look more like they're cups. No, they are chandeliers. Here another much lower lantern or incense burner. While we can't see the beauty inside the dome because there are no lights, we can get a sense of it from this part of the ceiling. A couple more faux corpses which look exactly that. They seem so strange. This may be one of those corpses. You can see the outline of the teeth pretty well. Yep, this is the incorruptible body of St. Victor, 3rd century. coming from the woman catacombs of St. Calixto. Isn't that an irony that I should have just read an article on exactly this kind of thing? Now we're leaving the only interesting place in Arco, the old town, for the new town and the bus station, and back home to Rondo. Ronda. I don't know if this is supposed to memorialize the Inquisition, but those apparent masks make it seem so. It sometimes gets pretty bright, sometimes blinding, but always it seems prettier than the dull browns of most of them. Plaza del Socorro. Nothing exciting terribly about it, but I'm having bolognese spaghetti. Down at the end here, way down at the end, is the new bridge. Just one of the many tourist streets that dominate this entire area. Here a more elaborate doorway. I don't know if it's a residence or not, but that wrought iron entry and door is pretty. Plus, this tile work is a little more detailed and interesting. The view tonight is different because of the color in the sky, but also because the sun is blocked by the clouds. Instead of seeing what looked like simply a grass or wheat covered slope there, you can see that it's actually an olive slope. So to sit out here in the evening is very lovely. It's a great view.